Wolves of Stillwood. There are no wolves in the Stillwood. The gray wolves of Virginia were made extinct over 100 years ago. According to the regular surveys by the National Forestry Service, no sign of any such animal has been found since 1900. The occasional reports of large predators, just after dusk or late at night, usually by the occasional hiker or party of campers in the Stillwood, residents of Lower Alethea, nearest the woods like myself, know better than to try, receive the same tired reply from animal control. There are no wolves in the Stillwood. When a pet gets lost in the dark of the Stillwood and never returns, or worse is found, mauled, the blame falls on the usual suspects: foxes, wild dogs, or teenagers with too much time and too little compassion. A few years back, when the Bradleys, a little family brand new to the Falls, had their boy David go missing from their own backyard, never finding more than scraps of his jacket and a little blood at the edge of the forest, the official response was adamant: this was a kidnapping, not an animal attack. Old-timers like me just shook our heads and muttered to ourselves. There are no wolves in the Stillwood. So, if you want to sleep at night this close to the forest, keep your doors locked tight and your shutters closed fast, if just to buy some peace of mind, to stop you from catching a glimpse of the Stillwood late at night. And should you somehow find yourself walking near, or God forbid through, the wood some evening, head home as quick as you can. Try to ignore the sounds of the night wind, howling as it does. It will only make your imagination run wild, after all. And should you see what cannot be polychrome eyes, shining through the mists from the underbrush or somehow in the branches above, or even through your gauze of your windows, should you be blessed enough to make it safely home, take what comfort you can in this thought. There are no wolves in the Stillwood.
The Never-Ending Road. In Corona, California, there once was a road known by most locals as the Never-Ending Road. Specifically, the road's true name was Lester Road. Now, over 20 years later, the landscape of Corona has changed, and the Never-Ending Road is no more. However, years ago, Lester Road was an unlit road that people claimed became a never-ending road when driven at night. The people who made such a drive were never seen from again. The legend became so well known that people refused to even drive Lester Road during the day. One night, like many teens my age, I drove up Lester Road, but only a short distance, and in my headlights it did look like it went on forever. Frightened, I quickly turned around, because if I continued up the road, I thought I might never return again. Perpetuation of the legend convinced local law enforcement to investigate. Lester Road took a sharp left turn at its end, and there were no guardrails. Beyond the curve lay a canyon, and on the other side of the canyon was another road that lined up so well with Lester Road that when viewed from the correct angle, especially at night, the canyon vanished from sight, and the road seemed to continue on up and over the hill on the other side of the canyon. Upon investigation of the canyon, dozens of cars were found, fallen to their doom, with the decomposing bodies of the victims still strapped to their seats.
The hunters had not returned. The villagers were gathered in the inn, huddled around the fire for warmth as a blizzard howled outside. The council was in session. The villagers watched in awe as the mighty, the powerful, the wealthy went through their power plays and paces, deciding the fate of the denizens of the realm. Not just the small duchy, the realm. Small villages were the place of choice, as the yokels were easily cowed by threats and powers they did not understand. Civilization and education rarely reached such places, vital as they were to the empire. But this evening, their purpose in being in this place was dual in nature, as the hunt, if unsuccessful, could prove dire, not just for the outcome, but the omen the common folk would take it as. A poor sign, a horrifying portent of things to come, at least in their minds. The hour drew later, and one by one the villagers began to disperse. They waved off the hunt as a failure, or they tried to claim they thought it was all superstition. There were 100 reasons, but for one reason or another, they slowly drifted away. The lights in their cabins slowly winked out, and only a handful of people were left in the inn. A number of women and children, desperate for their husbands and their fathers and their friends to come back, because if nobody returned from this, there would be no food for the village. But more immediately, what would become of them? It was common knowledge that only a few women had ever exhibited the natural skill required to become a hunter. And even if they were to make it, what would become of their children while they were away, with the other mothers already overworked? No, this hunt had to be successful, else none here would see the end of the year. Nobody was entirely sure who started it, but a quiet humming was heard. It followed a simple, quiet rhythm and was soothing. So it slowly began to gain steam, with the 20-some-odd people in the end sobbing quietly as they carried it along. And then one of the women's voices broke out into a prayer. "Please, gods, do not forsake us and our husbands this day. We need these men to return safely from their hunt, please. Return them to us, and let their hunt have been successful." The woman drifted into silence, occasionally uttering a pathetic please. The humming died down, and the women and children began to nod off to sleep in the comfort of their group. Just as the woman who had prayed began to nod off, she heard what sounded like a particularly queer coyote's howl, and sobbed as she imagined the creature eating her husband, before she fell into a dreamless sleep. With the sunrise came the shouts of a child. "They're back! They're back!" And everyone immediately jumped up to run and catch up with the score of men wandering into the village. They seemed tired, and many of them were injured or missing. But more or less, the hunt appeared successful. They walked in 2 lines, balancing a large table of wood between their shoulders. A cloak was tossed over whatever they were bringing back with them. One woman ran up to her husband. "Is what you have brought so glorious that you cannot simply put it in your backpacks?" He shrugged her away with a terrified look and simply said 3 words: "Town hall. Meeting." And they continued walking in silence. When the meeting was finally called, they set the large slab inside of the town hall, where they waited for people to gather around. "We were starving to death in the woods last night as it became dark. We had no idea which way was to home, and everything seemed to lead in a circle. Finally, at some point, this thing dropped on top of us and managed to kill James and Matthew." He pushed on through the story, almost ignoring the cries that came from James' daughter. "It mauled those of us that you see here before we managed to subdue it and get a knife through its heart. After that, we were able to find our way home." And he lifted the cloak, covering the thing to reveal a figure that looked like it had been cremated. "It was like this when we found it. The creature was at least as tall as a man and a half, and its skin was brittle and blackened. Its arms hung nearly to its feet, and had long, razor-sharp appendages that one could only assume was a finger. The legs were good 4 feet on their own, and everything was impossibly thin, to the point where a child's arm was thicker than this creature's thigh. This creature's arms tore through us without mercy, without pause. And I have no illusions of this creature being the last. Every household should arm itself with as many weapons as you can get a hold of." It let out an ungodly scream when it died that pierced our ears. I think the others know where we are now. The rest of the meeting was pointless shouting back and forth about what this thing was and the ramifications of bringing it here. And then everyone went about their day as though nothing were wrong. Everyone pretended that the mayor wasn't digging a particularly deep grave for this creature with no eyes and the devil's grin. Was it grinning back in there? No matter. He buried the damn thing in an undisclosed location so that nobody could tamper with it. I need to get a little better with rising action. The day seemed to go by much more quickly than usual, and before any of the residents of the small town knew, it was dark and time to get ready for bed. One by one, the lights winked out. Except tonight, rather than prayers of pleading for mercy, the night sky was littered with prayers of thanks. The next day passed uneventfully, except for the hunters reluctantly releasing more details about their 3-day hunt that seemed to last a year. They apparently got lost on the first night and were unable to find their way through the forest for the longest time. The creature was the only one they had seen in their entire time outside the village, and they saw it at least once an hour in the corners of their vision. Tailies set aside for the next day. The people of the town returned to work, seemingly more distant than the day before. Within 6 hours of sunrise, it seemed it was already sinking past the other horizon. and everyone moved to bed, more than a little disconcerted by the fact that they got so little work done today. And tonight, it was not prayers of desperation or thanks that littered the night, but screams of all the women who had laid down next to a man who went on the hunt. Every one of these men, as the sun went down, began undergoing a transformation. Within a number of minutes, they were a grinning monstrosity. Their thin, tendril arms whipped around the room until they encountered the nearest weapon they could find. Creatures that got a hold of bows or crossbows began flinging bolts of darkness. Swords produced the razor effect, and clubs produced bashing weapons with the strength to take off a man's head or destroy a wall. Within hours, high-pitched screams littered the night, while a few casualties were had. This was an outstanding victory for the citizens of this small town. Its new citizens, anyway.